I'm Lacey Brusky, and today I'm joined by my friends Drew Casey,
Hey.
Grace Chesson,
Hello.
and John Blaha.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about uncontacted people and their role in international affairs. I think the best place to start is by asking, what are uncontacted peoples? Who are they?
That's an interesting question. I think, if you take it at its face, uncontacted people should imply that they're populations of people, organized in tribes or villages or however, that maybe not necessarily have never been contacted by so-called outside groups, and we can figure out what that means in a minute. I think that requires some definition. But I think these uncontacted peoples are just not frequently in contact with the larger modern so-called social system that exists in the larger world.
So if they're so isolated, how could they possibly have a role in international affairs?
There's actually a number of ways we can take this discussion. Some of the points will make up the bulk of today's conversation. If they're so isolated, it's easy to think that they would not have any role in international affairs at all. But
that's exactly my thought. I mean, I would think that because they really aren't involved in the larger society, how could they possibly play a role in that?
I mean, if we take a look at some examples, some of which are actually quite recent as 2014, they give insight into how they play a role in the international community, whether it's just a small region such as between two countries or or in a global context. But as I mentioned earlier, in 2014, in the western state of Acre, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Brazil on the Peruvian border, a group emerged from the forest and made themselves known to the world. Why they emerged from the forest is actually quite interesting. They reported they were able to communicate with another local tribe who had a related language, and they reported that they were being attacked by drug traffickers and loggers in the region, and that they came out to seek help, which is actually quite interesting because there's this group of people that were completely unknown to at least the Brazilian state, Peruvian state, wherever, but they were able to understand that these forces, these transnational forces, I'll like to iterate that point at least, of illegal loggers and drug traffickers, they were able to understand that these are bad forces that are detrimental to their existence, and they were also able to understand that they could come out into the world and look for help, that there was help available.
So this sort of messes with the definition then of uncontacted, peoples that have not necessarily no contact or understanding of the existence of the other, but at least have diminished or infrequent contact or intersection between sort of the worlds the two worlds, the world of larger society, which we'll go back and I guess define a little later, but then also these so-called uncontacted tribes. Clearly they knew that something else was out there and they opted to apply for assistance. I wonder if this particular group, and I don't think so, the source that we're getting this from is a BBC article, but which we can provide in the show notes on our website. I don't think that anyone really knows if this tribe or this group knew that what they were seeking help from and to whom they were applying for help were of one entity, or if they knew that there was some sort of separation, or if they were from the same civilization or what.
That's something that we can only speculate. I mean,
were they successful?
To be honest, I don't know. This article was dated 2014, and I'm not sure of an update on that. We can look to certain institutions that exist in countries such as Brazil. They have a government bureau called the FUNAI, I believe, which exists solely for indigenous people's rights.
That's great. So how many people are left right now? So we talked about one group specifically, but where are they also popping up? I presume outside of just Brazil. So where are the tribes that have been uncontacted?
Well, that's something that's incredibly difficult to quantify, only because breaking this up into what uncontacted peoples are, there are some groups that have been previously contacted but remain isolated, and then there are some who are just completely undiscovered. So you have to make that distinction, and we can count how many have been previously contacted, but how do you count how many have been undiscovered?
That's sort of the whole black swan problem, is that it also expressed in Rumsfeldian terms, like you cannot know what you don't know, right? It's sort of ridiculous. You can sort of guess what you think you don't know, but the second that you can guess it, you already know it. So to the extent that there are undiscovered peoples out there, we won't know until we discover them, and then they will no longer be undiscovered, right?
I think at the same time, though, the labeling of undiscovered peoples or lost peoples is a bit of sensationalism. I think that there's probably a lot of sources would say that there's a small number of communities that are completely isolated from the outside world or have no contact.
Another, to answer your earlier question of where do they live, they actually exist all over the world. Whether North, South America, Africa, Papua New Guinea is an easy one to understand. But, there's countless examples that you can, if you do a quick Google search, you can find many, many examples. Some of the more interesting ones, I think, are a group called the Lacandan people in Mexico, who are descendants of a Mayan tribe after the collapse of the Mayan civilization. Mexican government discovered them however many years ago. Another interesting one, the Rook people, who are from northern Vietnam. They're actually discovered by the Viet Cong or the NVA during the Vietnam War. And, another insight into their role in international affairs, what happened to those people after they were discovered in the midst of total war.
From that, can I conclude that we are in agreement that we shouldn't contact these people, or should we? What do you think is I think there's a lot of guilt from a post-colonial era where we really don't want to involve ourselves too much, but is it important to gather information and knowledge about this? Anthropologists are doing it. So
I think the first thing to look at is the why. Why are these people isolated or uncontacted? And that can branch off between, sometimes it is circumstantial. There are a lot of geographical factors, dense forest that makes it hard for the outside world to get in, or vice versa. But then a lot of the time, on the flip side of that is, by choice. So, and there's this whole spectrum of, the level of isolation. So I think you really have to take it case by case,
Absolutely. Is it hard? Is it feasible for us to contact them and yes, maybe perhaps gather data? Anthropologists, obviously, we would have real scientists going in to contact them, but is it possible for us to do that without influencing them in some capacity?
I don't know. And
I don't know how you separate those two, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
That question may open up a whole can of worms. There's many reasons why we would want to engage uncontacted peoples that exist around the world. But when you phrase the question like that, that presents a lot of different questions, whether or not we want to risk exposing them to foreign diseases,
exactly,
or risk of cultural extinction by them being integrated into,
which is already a problem that's ongoing. So,
right.
So perhaps go back and tell me what in your head, John, the pros are, and everybody else feel free to chime in. But what are your pros in favor of that, and does that outweigh the negatives that you just listed?
Whether or not to say that outweighs the cons, it's difficult to say because we exist in the world, at least where I'm sitting, relatively comfortably. But, one of the main reasons why we would want to engage uncontacted people around the world is simply to gain a better understanding. We can better understand the human race, the way language works, genetics, just all sorts of different anthropological reasons. Another reason why we may want to engage with uncontacted peoples is for medical research and medical discovery. A lot of modern medicine, actually about 25% of Western pharmaceuticals originate in densely forested areas like the Amazon basin and places such as that. Whatever avenue we engage them, through anthropologists, through linguists, through missionaries, through Christian missionaries, whatever, upon their discovery, we can observe their their medical practices, how they treat their sick, how they farm, how they hunt, how they gather, what plant life they use. We're able to discover all sorts of different plant life that exists in rainforest, and these people are able to show us how they use them for medicine, which we can use for ourselves.
Yeah, I think the core point of that is that, again, like, these people are people, they're human beings, and therefore they have two very important aspects to them. One is they're worthy of study, they're worthy of knowing, right? Because they've discovered things about the world that we share with them that we may not know, that I think that we can contribute to human society at large. And yet I think they have the right to self-determination, and they have the right to set up their own communities as they see fit. They have the right to not suffer from the risk of potential disease or any other calamity that modern society at large may inadvertently, or in some horrible cases, intentionally bring upon them. But what's the middle ground between those two? Right. I mean, so we want to study and learn about them, but doing so may bring about a particular group's demise. I think, surely the short-term solution would be to preserve and protect, right? Continue as happens in Brazil. Although what's been noted, particularly by this BBC article that we were referencing earlier about the group that emerged in 2014, that this FUNAI organization, this Brazilian government organization that seeks to protect and preserve these groups within Brazilian territory by sort of cordoning off the land that they're known to live in, sort of, with a wide berth around where these groups are believed to be residing, in an attempt to prevent any cross contact between those groups and the outside world. FUNAI has done so ham-handedly, as pointed out in this BBC article, learning through a series of mistakes, right? Direct contact with a lot of these peoples to bring medicine or treat or bring food, oftentimes also brings diseases that the groups did not realize that they were carrying, right? So I think the short-term solution would be to, live and let live for now, protect, preserve, and allow, certainly, but leave the valve open for these groups' access to come for aid if necessary, but then in the future leave open also the possibility for some sort of controlled contact that limits the possibility of disease, that limits the possibility of sociocultural trauma that would come with such difference being suddenly and overwhelmingly imposed upon your whole worldview.
So a question coming from this, if we're looking at the side of self-determination and the strategy now being implemented for territorial integrity and protecting the isolation of these groups, so are these groups subject to the same laws of the rest of society within that country? I mean,
how do we categorize that exactly?
I think these are actually the questions that need to be asked that lead to the development of policy. The right to self-determination, is that a U.S. policy of the United States? Is that a policy of the United Nations?
Is there an inherent right to self-determination? And I think there is in most Western societies.
But of course, we're breaking into the big ethical questions here.
I know it's hard.
I don't think anyone has an answer to.
No, but I think that it's important what John said about us asking these questions in an attempt to develop policy, that this is an important thing that we should be doing and that more policymakers should be doing.
For I think 98% of the cases involved were sort of sucked into modern society outside of their control without their own determination, and now we do have native rights issues, but they're fundamentally different than those in Brazil because of that sort of forced
we're just different.
Subsumation.
We're just different too.
It's a different situation, and that is a tragedy of its own, which we could go on for days discussing.
So I want to bring this sort of back home and go back to more of the ethical discussion that we were having earlier about whether or not how we should approach if they contact us. And you have that example where they did reach out in 2014, according to the BBC article. But what protocol should we have in place for when and if they were to contact us?
I think that's very contextual. And to cite a number of examples or a couple of examples, going back to the group in Acre, in the state of Acre in northwest Brazil, they came specifically looking for help. And if that's the case, maybe a state is obligated to help them. On the contrary, though, there's another group that lives on Sentinel Island and a part of the Andaman, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Andaman Island chains off the coast of India. Really fascinating case, actually. The Sentinelese is this known group of people. Were discovered by Western civilization, I think dating back to the 1700s, but they've been so resistant to outside influence and reacted quite violently to any outside influence that they've remained uncontacted for the past couple of centuries.
Didn't they kill people?
I think they have, but this isn't certainly also an interesting case, though, and goes back to our definitional issue of what does uncontacted mean, right? So certainly they've been contacted in a number of instances. So this group of islands is actually almost to the coast of Thailand. It's out on the very far eastern edge of the Bay of Bengal, but it's administered by India. And at various times, anthropologists, mostly from India, have traveled to Sentinel Island on state and private sort of research missions to contact the tribe or see what they could find out. I think most of the time they did not even make landfall. They just sort of stayed in boats right up close to the beach. In one notable instance that was filmed, you could find this on YouTube. Actually, if you type in Sentinelese on YouTube, it'll be like the first within the first couple of search hits that come up. There's a 4 to 5 minute video of a group of Indian anthropologists, I believe in the 80s, throwing coconuts and bags of, I think, more coconuts onto the beach for the Sentinelese people to collect, right? So this is contact, right, to a certain degree. So certainly, okay, so this happens one time and the Sentinelese know that there's other people out there, clearly, right? So they at least know more than they knew before that this happened, if this is the first time, which it's not, but hypothetically speaking.
And I think this is kind of an extreme case too. So I think, and Lacey, this is not picking on you, the initial question of, this elicits such, I'll use the term sensationalism again, this idea that these barbaric, isolated people are emerging from the depths of the jungle. I mean, that really, I don't think is kind of the norm in this case. As I said, there is a big spectrum, and all of these people, or the majority, they have neighbors. It's not like they're coming from nowhere.
Exactly. And I think that's a perfect point, Grace, because I wanted to hit on that, exactly what you said, but that we should reflect on the ideas of civilization or modernity or barbarism and savages. Are uncontacted people really uncivilized or not a part of modern society?
No. But these groups of people, even if they're using, bows and arrows or tools that we don't consider, or that we consider
not sophisticated or technologically sound. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like they are existing completely in their own bubbles without evolving over, these hundreds of thousands of years. So
sure.
I don't know. I think they are just as much a part of modern society as we are, only because temporally they exist concurrently with us. So to say that they're not a part of modern society, I think is a little unfair.
Okay, I think that's a good point.
Sense, yeah.
Well, and then clearly even so what we can see of many of these peoples, and again, this whole conversation just by its very nature, because it's like a 30 to 40 minute podcast, or maybe 20 depending on how we edit this later, if you're still with us, is broad brushing by necessity. Not that we want to do that, but again, how many, can you hit every aspect of one topic, particularly this complex and this broad, in one short podcast from informed but non-experts? No, you can't. So what I'm about to say is unfortunately broad brush, but not on purpose. Again, so we're sort of struggling with this idea of do certain groups fit or not fit into what modern society is? And I guess one of the questions is are they civilized or not? And what is civilization necessarily? I think civilization is groups of people who use language, communicate with each other. They form social structures, cooperative social structures. They use technology. However, primitive from our own perspective that technology may seem, but they use resources in their environment to achieve goals that they have, right? So they organize and they fight against their environment to set up a society of some kind. And whether or not that society is plugged in the ways that we normally like to see, right? Us so-called modern societists, let's call us that. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're uncivilized or not a part of modern society. And I think that's a very good point that John brought up.
Well, I think all of those points, and like Drew, I'm just going to reiterate what he said, that this is a really hard topic to delve into over this amount of time. But I think that we've all covered and hit on the ethical dilemmas associated with this, but also what these people are, and bringing to light the fact that they are important and they do provide important things that we really don't know about. And, the quote you used, Drew, about we can't know what we don't know, but this is a very complex topic, but I think we did a great job of covering it. So thank you for joining us. For more information and to see the video and articles we've mentioned, just visit mattersofstate.org. You can also see if you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to write us at facebook.com/mattersofstate. Tune in to us next week. Thanks for listening.
The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot.